au-dessus des vieux volcans. Glisse tes ailes sous le tapis du vent. Voyage, voyage, éternellement.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of the Friday Salon. Today we're going to delve into the geopolitics of a well-changing and volatile world environment.
You've seen this issue in the news a lot nowadays, and it's certainly aroused a lot of confusion and a lot of anxiety for some people. But where lies anxiety, lies opportunity.
Definitely, and we're here to help you understand. Of course, it's our pleasure, it's your treasure, you know the usual,
As
you
usual.
know the song. And today we're going to discuss about the world-changing environment with the election of President-elect Donald Trump. And we're going to delve into the geostrategic consequences of that election on the international scene, but specifically in North America between the US and Canada and the Arctic Circle.
Exactly. So Donald Trump, without even having assumed the office just yet, has already put forward a position of very aggressive economic nationalism. Dude, why don't I get closer to you too?
Oh, stop, Nicky.
I felt too far from you.
Oh la la.
Staying far from you is not good for my health.
Oh, Nicholas.
So with this aggressive economic nationalism, markets are in a whirlwind, people's minds are in a whirlwind, Canada is going to get annexed by America. What exactly are we dealing with? A lot of confusion, but thankfully the Salon is here to clear up the confusion. We're going to look at the geopolitics, economic aspect of it as well. And we're going to even look at some historical precedent for this, let's say, chamboulement, as the French would say, this global chamboulement which is happening. Why don't we begin then with a little history?
Of course. Now, first of all, it's very important for you to understand what's happening right now. The world is shifting drastically.
Yes.
Drastically. So whatever you work, if you work in the services, especially in finance, in law, in any type of service
Maybe
industry,
you want to make some changes to your stock portfolio or something.
of course, you will need to understand what's happening, and that video is right for it. It's right up front. It's a one-stop shop. You know, the Salon is philosophy, geostrategy, politics, philosophy, spirituality, love, purpose, and everything, right? By the way, we need you to subscribe, like, share, and of course we have a link in the description if you want to support us. Anyways, let's delve into the topic. So we know that President Donald Trump, first of all, let's get the problematic straight, right? President Donald Trump has said that, he wants to buy Canada.
Or annex Canada.
Canada. He wants to buy Greenland. He wants to...
reclaim the Panama Canal, rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And for us in the 21st century, this is like kind of absurd. What's happening? Because, and we don't blame you for thinking that. A lot of what Donald Trump has done is he's thrown the assumptions and the base principles of the liberal world order into skepticism. He's thrown them into question. He's kind of bringing back a more antique mode of governance.
Realism.
He's bringing back realism in the classical Greek style. We've watched, as we've mentioned in our past Trump video, you should totally check that out. How does Donald Trump think? For a great insight into the workings of his mind. We mentioned that he is straight out of Thucydides. He is straight out of the history of the Peloponnesian Wars without even realizing or knowing what that might be. And so he brings a very transactional look into power politics.
Okay. So the U.S. basically, as we've said, wants to shift the world order.
Yep.
And we need to understand what is happening by delving into the history. Because to understand the present, you need to understand the past, right?
For what is the past but a reverberation? Or what is the present but a reverberation of the past?
Oh my God.
That's all.
Oh, beautiful.
That's all.
Therefore, let us get a bit of context about the U.S. foreign policy, its history, and its future. So I would say we should start with the discovery of America. I would say.
What even compelled Europeans to cross the Atlantic and make it to this new land, which they found by accident? Let's face it, they found it by accident. What even compelled these transatlantic voyages?
Well, at the beginning, it was right. The European powers wanted to contour, I would say, the Ottoman areas, that area you call Bab el-Mandab.
Okay.
That trade route.
Yes.
There's a trade route, right? When you want to trade with the Indies at the time, India, what is nowadays India.
What they would have called the Orient.
Yeah, the Orient, the extreme Orient, Asia, right? You needed to pass through the Ottoman Empire to Bab el-Mandab. It's a strait from Yemen, Eritrea, and Djibouti. Bab el-Mandab, okay, is a key strategic route for the world trade.
Yes.
Since
world trade as a concept even was conceived.
Exactly.
Let's say.
Therefore, the Europeans used to contour Africa.
Yes,
right?
they used to circumvent the southern Cape. That's how you would have accessed Asian markets as a European trader.
Okay, but now they wanted a fastest route.
Yes.
So they went...
Who can blame them?
Of course. So they went west. Mm-hmm. But what did they find?
Yes, at this point, there was already the understanding that the world was round.
Yes.
The fact that you could go around. You would watch a ship going and its sail dipping below the horizon. And so Christopher Columbus would receive his sponsorship to go and find a new route to trade with the Orient and thereby circumvent the Ottoman blockade of the Silk Road of the Bab el-Mandeb. And he ended up landing in the Caribbean, calling it the West Indies, because he believed he had, or calling them Indians, let's say, because he really believed that he had landed upon India to resume his trade of silk and spice.
Okay, but then he was faced with a new dilemma, up new continent, up new world.
Yep.
And that was bigger than they would have
Ever
expected
imagined.
it, right?
Yeah.
And we have, of course, that legend of the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, what the Greeks used to call the Phoenicians, who discovered it.
The people of the Levant.
Exactly. Or you have Lev Erikson, the Viking.
Leif Erikson, yes.
Leif Erikson, the Viking explorer. But it wasn't, I would say, it wasn't officialized, right? Like the discovery of America wasn't officialized, and therefore when Christopher Columbus, in the search for a new trade route, found the continent, it was exploited, and then they forgot the main
Objective of the mission.
The main objective, which was?
To get around the Ottoman blockade and trade with the Orient.
Okay, so therefore, afterwards, you have the countries that started to form themselves, and then you have the U.S. making the canal, right? They did the Panama Canal. Mm-hmm. You have it on. We'll put some very nice maps, right? So people can understand what we're talking about exactly geographically speaking. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you have the Panama Canal that was constructed by
the Roosevelt government.
Okay,
Teddy Roosevelt.
The Roosevelt administration. Therefore, it was a great way to have trade coming from the east to the west. Mm-hmm. Okay, it was more economical.
Yes, it was.
Exactly.
And consider, that's what has motivated a lot of voyage, or a lot of innovation has been how do we do trade more efficiently and more effectively. That's what has motivated a lot of geopolitics in that time and to this day.
Okay. So we know that the Anglo-Saxon Empire, we're talking about the British Empire for now, based itself on its economy. It was like Carthage.
Mercantilism, yes.
Yes, it was based on services. It wasn't based on the land.
Yes.
Correct?
And that's just a natural reaction to the fact that Great Britain is such a small landmass.
Yes.
They inevitably. So the fact that they became a seafaring people was a, let's say, evolutionary, civilizationally developmental consequence of the fact that their landmass was so small.
Okay.
In an antique economic model, you would just expand your territory. But when you're on an island, you can only expand so much within your own borders. And therefore you have to innovate and develop. Hence why Great Britain was one of the first to embrace steam power and industrialize so rapidly, because they had to overcome this geographical constraint of a small landmass.
Yeah, they cannot exploit agriculture like continental powers like France, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Therefore, after the Second World War, you've had the center of the Anglo-Saxon Empire shifting to the U.S., right?
Exactly.
One of the preconditions for the American intervention was that the British needed to give up their empire.
Yes, this is the post-empire period, anti-colonialism.
One of the bases of the Yalta Conference, right? Mm-hmm. And that left Winston Churchill very depressed, especially when they lost Singapore. That was a basic and a fundamental trading post.
The jewel of the East, yeah.
Exactly. And afterwards, India and more Canada.
Yes.
More and more Canada. So what's the issue nowadays? Now you have an American... we could say people call it an empire, right?
Yeah, you could say that. Even though it may not necessarily title itself officially as being imperial, a lot of the symbolism and motifs are still there. You have the symbolism of the eagle, of a senate, of a republic, and let's not forget, most importantly, their global presence.
I see. Military bases all over the world.
And even their cultural imperialism,
The capacity to intervene anytime, anywhere. Very nice. Therefore, let us delve into the basis of American foreign policy at first, right?
Totally.
Americans at the beginning were isolationists.
Yeah, they had that little conflict. Again, it seems the Ottomans were at the center of so many global disputes back in the day. The first American real war, or the war that founded the American expansionism, was the Barbary Wars. The Americans wanted to do trade in the Mediterranean, but their ships kept getting intercepted by pirates that were being supported by the Ottoman Empire coming out of Tunisia and Algeria. And so America developed a small navy with 6 frigates.
The Moors.
Exactly. They developed a navy, small navy, 6 frigates. There was one scholar who said that when I was researching this, I was expecting to learn about the birth of a navy. He said, instead, I learned about the birth of a nation. So that was really the birth of the American, let's say, empire. But following that point was the Monroe Doctrine. And that's the essence of this all.
We do not interfere into European affairs. We do not meddle into European affairs. We're isolationists.
Exactly. America was founded by Puritans. Let's not forget that. And a lot of the people that voyaged to the New World in, let's say, the 1600s were refugees. For example, the judges who ordered the execution of King Charles I following the English Civil War. Yes, the judges that ordered the execution of King Charles, when the monarchy came back, they had to flee. And where did they flee to? Consider the naming of this, New Haven. New Haven.
Interesting.
So America was always attempting to be that utopia, that shining city on the hill on the new continent, aiming for a utopian idealism, which manifested itself in the foreign policy regard as being a doctrine of isolationism. Forget the old world's problems. We are Americans. We're going to do our own thing.
I see. Interesting. Very interesting. Therefore, Americans didn't want to meddle into European politics, so
they were in their self-improvement era.
Okay.
They were working on themselves.
Very nice. Very nice. And therefore, for a long time, Americans did not meddle into European affairs, but then came a turning point.
World War I.
Okay, so during the First World War, we invite you to check our video on the Treaty of Versailles by John Maynard Keynes.
Yes.
You'll understand more
Great video.
precisely what we're talking about. And therefore, Americans decided to intervene. Wilson's 14 points
really changed the shape, structure, and form of foreign policy.
So Woodrow Wilson gave a certain, I would say, continuity to the American foreign policy from that time.
Yeah.
Like it was, I would say, a manifesto. It was
totally.
a testament. A testament.
A declaration of purpose, even.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Therefore, Americans started to intervene and to meddle into European affairs.
Yes.
At their demand. At their demand.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. It was not some imposition.
Okay, and during the Second World War, you've had the
Marshall Plan.
The Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was basically the ability of the Americans to reconstruct Europe by
bonds and subsidies, yes.
Bonds to the British government that itself was acting as their agent for the continent, right? It's that Anglo-Saxon Protestant Brotherhood. Yeah, truly. And that Great Britain acted, if you will, as the banker of the continental Europeans.
I like that, yeah.
For the Americans,
yes,
correct?
Totally.
Okay. So afterwards, you've had more American implication into European affairs, and especially during the Cold War.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. During the Cold War, you've had American, even secret services, and let's not get too deep into that, right? But who were basically doing their best to prevent Soviet expansion. Yes. Okay. And since then, they've been very into it. Then you've had the creation of NATO.
With American leadership, of course.
And then after the fall of the Berlin Wall, nobody quite understood why NATO was still existent, right? Like even Charles de Gaulle used to see it as an American will to just control European affairs, continental affairs, and he even referred to that as being the Anglo-Saxon plot,
the perfidious Albion.
Perfidious Albion, yes. You read my mind, yeah. The perfidious Albion's plot.
Yes.
Okay, to divide the continent and prevent what Bismarck used to say. What is a good foreign policy? It's
an alliance with Russia.
An alliance with Russia between France, Germany, and Russia, right?
That's been an existential fear. If you're the UK, if you're Great Britain, it's always been an existential fear that two powers on the continent would unite and therefore be able to rival you.
Yeah, because that's how William the Conqueror just took over that island in 1066, right? Uh-huh. Because when the powers on the continent are united, then there's that fear of an imbalance of power and therefore a certain invasion of the British island. It's a completely normal, I would say, will to balance powers.
That's what it is.
Therefore, Americans are intervening. They have a new market. Europeans are consuming in a quite American way.
Yeah, you see the influx of American consumerism into Europe. Much of the French Golden Age in the late 50s, 60s was...
Grande Glorieuse.
Yes, Les Trente Glorieuses. We can think of the era of Charles de Gaulle for imports, let's say. But unintentionally, because Charles de Gaulle kind of banned, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but he banned American music. So what a lot of French artists did is they would go to America, they would hear the melodies of the songs there, they'd bring back the melodies and the production, but just use French lyrics, for example.
Exactly, and then you've had that rebellion of that new generation, well, you could say fueled by the Americans, that was Mai 68.
I knew you were going to say that.
May 1968, right, truly.
Yes.
Right? And they basically rebelled against Charles de Gaulle in the name of communism, which is quite interesting because it was fueled by other forces and powers. And for the sake and for the, I would say, interest of American market, economical expansionism. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we know that Americans now have an interest in European affairs. But now, and that has been the basis of any liberal order, right?
Yes, it's a world order led by the Americans. We went from a Pax Britannica to a Pax Americana.
If you want to be a French president, what do you have to do? What do you have to do? Simple. What do you have to do? You want to become French president. You need to have the right connections, right? Mm. What is one of the bases of the right connections that you can have to become a French president?
With the Americans.
Yes. So it's an organization called Global Young Leaders.
Which Macron attended that, no?
Macron, Nicolas Sarkozy, and François Hollande, many others. Mm-hmm. So young global leaders is, I would say, if you will, it's Arminius visiting the empire. That's what it is. It's Arminius visiting Rome. Arminius, the son of the Germanic chieftain,
yes,
who visits Rome to understand that, okay, we cannot stand against those guys. They're too powerful. They're rich. They have order. They have values. Mm-hmm. Let's be part of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. And we're not saying it's good or bad, right? It's just a fact, and it's above good and evil. It's just the way it is. So you have also, of course, other nations who have their, we could say, their formations to have
their future leadership.
To have future leaders that would be lenient and we could say in accordance with their political interest for the future.
For sure.
Yes, it's a long-term investment. So, anyways, that's how French presidents used to start their career, right? By having the right connections with Uncle Sam, correct? Not all of them, most of them. Anyways, but when Donald Trump came into the game, everything changed.
Yes. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, he tossed a lot of the assumptions of liberalism into the shadow, into the realm of skepticism. Let's say NATO, for example. That's the example that always comes to mind.
Let's remember that meeting.
Yes.
Between Donald Trump and
Angela Merkel.
Angela Merkel and the chief of NATO at the time. He told them, listen, you need to pay. We're paying too much.
Yeah.
Time for you to pay. And he did it on live television, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Trump doesn't understand why they need to to keep on paying more than others to protect others.
Again, there's a deep philosophical basis, universal historicism. There's a basis in universal historicism for the existence of NATO, unless you are Donald Trump, in which case it's just a business agreement. It's like an investment fund where each contributor pools together their money in the name of some goal, right? Okay. But he was just looking at the other investors, the Europeans, and saying, you're not making your contributions.
Yes.
You're not making your contributions to the fund. So that's how Trump looked at it, as, again, a business transaction.
It's a deal.
It's a deal. He was looking for nothing more than the other parties to do their fair share.
Of course. And now you have the same thing happening with Canada.
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
We know that approximately 70% of the market, of the Canadian market is based on U.S. Consumerism.
Yes.
We know that Canada sends, as Trump would say, we don't need their cars, we don't need their milk, we have plenty of cars, plenty of milk, we have plenty of everything, actually. Correct? We know that. And like he's doing the Canadians a favor to become a trade partner with them. Correct? Mm. Well, is it true? Is it false? But that's what happened. And therefore, we have a certain American expansionism into Canadian territory. Why?
So it's very interesting. You might see that on the one side, in Europe, on one hemisphere of the world, Trump is withdrawing himself. But on the other hemisphere of the world, he's expanding himself.
How's that called?
Well, we discussed the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine said, forget Europe. So Trump is forgetting Europe. He's saying NATO, United Nations, what's up with all of that? Skepticism, European Union, oh my God, I'm an American. So we see the return of the Monroe Doctrine, but not exclusively the Monroe Doctrine. What followed after the Monroe Doctrine, when you combine it with this growing spirit of manifest destiny, which is the American will to power for expansion westward expansion across the continent, what followed it was the era of Teddy Roosevelt and what we might call the Roosevelt Corollary.
Okay.
So whereas the Monroe Doctrine says forget the Eastern Hemisphere, the Roosevelt Corollary says let's have dominion, therefore, over the Western Hemisphere.
Protect your backyard.
Yeah, protect your backyard, exactly.
I see. Interesting. So now Donald Trump wants to assert his dominance, right?
Exactly. He's bringing back the Rooseveltianism.
But there's something very interesting in that is that we know that the ice is melting up north.
Exactly.
We know that we have the Great North Passage.
Yes.
And we know that the Canadian Parliament, not a long time ago, decided to call it the Canadian Northern Passage to assert its sovereignty. Right? But we know that it's very hard to protect that area.
For sure it is, especially when it's all covered in ice.
Okay, so we know that that part of the world is disputed by many big players.
For sure. There was the formation of the Arctic Council, for example, a group of nations joining together to... it kind of reminds me of the Berlin Conference, you know, the partition of Africa.
Yes.
Now it's the partition of the Arctic,
Yes.
let's say. And it's very interesting. The United States, in the formation of this Arctic Council, refused to sign their name on any document containing the words climate change in there, even though a lot of analysts will credit the melting of the ice to the climate change that is happening.
Very interesting, very interesting. So why would that northern passage be so important, honestly? Why?
Exactly.
So it's a passage that links what to what?
The Atlantic with the Pacific, with the Arctic.
Interesting. So
Yes.
basically you're telling me that there's a passage, there's a passage that links the trade from Asia to Europe and to New York.
And to even the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Very interesting.
And get this, more efficiently than the Panama Canal.
Yeah, that was my question. So they have the Panama Canal.
Exactly. Like, what do we need the Northwestern Passage for? Isn't the Panama Canal good enough?
They have the Panama Canal, but why would they need it? Can you tell me? Can you give me some numbers, please? Why would they use the Northern Passage rather than the Panama Canal? Why?
You see reductions in shipping time and shipping voyage length
Yes.
by like anywhere between 40 to 20%. Therefore, less fuel. Therefore, and this is another one. The Panama Canal is almost obsolete nowadays. It was built during the period of Roosevelt, right?
Yeah.
So with that means there's limitations for the volume of your ship. If your ship is too large and dips too deep below the water,
We've had many stories of
Yeah,
ships
for example,
blocking the canal and
it happens
therefore
often.
blocking world trade.
Exactly. There was that famous instance, for example, of the Suez Canal, right? That's just what happens when man gets too egotistical and attempts to defy nature. Nature slaps man back in the face and says, "Hold on, just a second."
I see.
You know, but that Northwestern Passage is so savage. There's nothing artificial about it except for the fact that maybe global carbon dioxide emissions have resulted in a radiation effect that has heated the ice. That's the only artificial aspect of it. Otherwise, it is so savage and untamed that, like, with the Panama Canal, there's depth limitations, for example. You can't load your ship up with too much cargo, or else it's going to scrape the bottom of the canal.
Okay,
And therefore you cannot pass.
So you're telling me that the Northern Passage will now, with the icebreakers, the Canadians basically also told the U.S.
Yes.
that we could be partners in building and implementing icebreakers, which the Americans unfortunately refused. And basically you're telling me that with the ice melting, you're going to have a passage for trade
Yes.
from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and that is the busiest trade route in the world.
In the world.
So first of all, you earn taxation
Yep.
from that canal.
Yep. You save on fuel.
You save on fuel.
You cut down voyage times.
And
you're able to transit more cargo at a time.
We're talking about billions and billions of dollars.
We're talking about like
Daily.
a new era of global commerce.
Daily.
Yeah.
I see. So you're telling me that if the U.S. doesn't control the Panama Canal, and Canada controls it.
You mean the Northwest Passage?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Canada controls the Northwest Passage, yes. It's going to affect U.S. trade.
Totally. It definitely is going to affect U.S. trade. This is a mythical passage. People have been trying to find this thing since the 1700s. You know, that Arctic sphere of the world, the Canadian Arctic archipelago, is a very treacherous place
Yes.
to do commerce. So many ships have gotten stuck there, and so many crews have died trying to find it. But it's always been, of course, with the mission of connecting the Western Hemisphere with the Eastern Hemisphere via transit.
Interesting.
Even Jacques Cartier, one of or I'd say the original Canadian explorer, with the exceptions of the Vikings that made landfall in what we call today the Maritimes, as he was going down the St. Lawrence, he encountered some rapids as the river narrows, right? And I think that's even
The Saint Laurent.
this Saint Laurent, but there's a specific word. I think the word Stadacona, which was the indigenous name for Montreal, or no, Hochelaga, which was the indigenous name for Montreal, even means where the river gets narrow.
Okay.
Where the river narrows. He thought when he would pass this narrowing and these rapids, he would find China. And hence he called them les rapides La Chine, the La Chine rapids.
Yes,
After these rapids, I'm going to find China.
Sur les voyages du Canada.
I've seen that on your shelf. I got to read that one day. But yes, that's always been the aspiration of this Northwest Passage. But now with modern trends and trends in, let's say, climate, that mythical passage has now been opened up, set to usher in a new era of global commerce.
I see. Very interesting. So you're telling me that, so the US basically wants that passage to be international.
Yes.
But you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me when Germany is asking France to, you know what, let's make
You have a nuclear bomb?
Yeah,
Sick.
exactly.
Good job,
You
guys.
read my mind. Do you have a nuclear bomb? Let's make it European. Like, together forever.
Wow, it's like a kid sharing his toys on the playground.
Yeah, like, no, it's not your toy. It's ours. We're family.
Exactly.
You see? Like, it's a certain, I could say it's a horse of Troy.
Yeah.
In a certain way, right?
It's a polite deception.
I like that. It's polite deception.
It's a polite
I
deception.
like that. It's a fleeting vanity. I see. And completely, so therefore, that attempt to internationalize that canal would be a certain way of saying you do not own sovereignty upon that canal.
Yeah, it's a secession of sovereignty is what it is.
But now, if you're honest about it, Canadians, do they have the capacity to assert their sovereignty on the canal? Like, I would say realistically speaking.
Yes, let's be realistic about it. The Canadian Navy is not what it used to be.
Yes.
And that's just a fact. Which is interesting when you consider that after at the conclusion of the Second World War.
The third biggest one?
Yeah, Canada had the third largest navy in the world. Whereas nowadays, Canada doesn't even have operational submarines. Think about it. The only existing submarines that Canada has are like from the immediate post-war period, and they're dry dock submarines. They don't even operate. They only exist for the reason of maintaining a consistent submarine staff. That's the only reason. So in terms of naval capacity, well, no one can really go up against the United States to begin with. Never mind what Canada has in its naval stores at the moment. But then there's even also the question of sovereignty. And sovereignty, well, it's somehow a difficult thing to determine, especially if you're a power politics player like Trump, who believes in right and might makes right. But there are one of the qualifying attributes of sovereignty is the existence of a population, of a land being populated by a group of people.
Now, we know it's a very harsh environment, right?
Yeah, it's not. The people from Toronto wouldn't make it there, for example.
Of course, we have a lot of indigenous people from the region,
Exactly.
Inuits and other nations that live there, right? And who have special funding from the Canadian government, the federal government, to preserve a certain presence there.
Exactly.
Correct?
First Nations people are there in that Arctic region, asserting Canada's sovereignty.
Exactly.
They exist there, asserting Canada's sovereignty. Yes.
Completely. And we could say, so there are multiple aspects to that part of the world, right? First of all, on a trading aspect, economical aspect.
Which we've discussed in detail just a minute ago.
Of course,
yes.
it's the trade route that would, we could say,
reshape the world.
It would defect, right? It would completely nullify the Panama Canal to a certain extent.
It's you versus the guy she tells you not to worry about.
It's like it would steal 60% approximately, right? According to the Friday Salon Institute for Statistical Commercial Studies, it would steal 60% of the Panama Canal taxation system, trade route, and blah blah blah. Correct? Therefore, we know that that passage will be fundamental for the trade routes and for the future.
For the rest of the century.
Because let us understand, we live in service-based economies.
Yes, we do.
Let us understand that we all depend, all of us, in the West and in the East, to a certain extent, to a big extent, to those trade routes. Let us remember when France and other nations intervened
in the Suez
in
crisis.
the Suez crisis, right? And after pressure from the Soviet government, had to just
Withdraw themselves.
withdraw and just give Jamal Abdel Nasser the sovereignty over the Suez Canal,
Yeah.
the Egyptian president at the time. And let us remember also, not so long a time ago, there was a crisis. The Yemenis, the Houthi in Yemen, pirates from the Houthi from Yemen decided to attack ships going from Bab el-Mandeb. And it's a big problem, because if ships are being attacked, then it's that whole trading system that is not working.
Yes.
Therefore, it is the basis of the empire. When we say the empire, we mean the Anglo-Saxon empire that has been transferred to the U.S. Let's not call it empire, but I would say system,
Yes.
that international system, that liberal...
International. Yes,
liberal,
that's the way to put it.
Liberal capitalistic international system, right? Of commerce, of individual endeavors,
Democracy, liberalism. Yes.
of trade, of course. That would be, I would say, desacralized. No, desacralized is a big word. I would say falsified, right? Falsified, right? It will not be functioning anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? Therefore, those traits and passages are fundamental for the functioning of the world. So why wouldn't the U.S. just agree to preserve
Yes, exactly.
Canadian sovereignty?
Why? What is it about these Americans? Or maybe I shouldn't put it like that. But like, why aren't they just satisfied with allowing Canada to have its free reign in the Arctic? Well, nobody contests that this archipelago belongs to Canada. These islands are within Canada's borders and within Canada's monopoly of use of force. The main contention is with who gets to control what shipping happens through there.
Yes.
That's the main contention.
Yes.
And the Americans are contesting it because they're very worried about what precedent it is going to set for the rest of their
see.
global affairs.
For the Panama Canal, for example.
For the Panama Canal, for the Suez Canal, for the Bab el-Mandeb, for example.
We know that in Djibouti, you have Djibouti is a country in Africa where you have a lot of Western military bases. A lot of them. You have French, you have British, you have American, and all of the boys are there. Why? Because it controls the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. Bab el-Mandeb is fundamental, as we've said, for the trade routes. Therefore, the U.S., we could say conferring the total control of that trade route, correct, to Canada, would create a precedent.
Yes, it would embolden the American adversaries in the region.
And we know that common law, the law of the Anglo-Saxons and the liberal world at
Is
large,
based on
precedents.
There you go.
So if he did that, why would I not do that, correct?
Exactly.
And it's completely logical and understandable.
You cannot blame the Americans for thinking like this. You cannot blame them.
But honestly, let's be clear and honest. A deal must be reached, right?
For sure.
We have a great, we could say dealer. We have a great deal maker who's getting into the presidency in a couple of days now. In 6 days? 5 days?
5 days.
5
no,
days.
January 21st, correct?
Yes.
So 6 days,
6 days. So we have people who are ready to make deals. We have people who are ready to understand each other's viewpoints. And I would say that the biggest and the most important job of the 21st century will be diplomacy. The ability to understand the capacities and the interest of the other. To put yourself in everybody else's shoes. To make a deal, you need to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You need to understand what he can work on and what he cannot work on. And hopefully we'll have great leaders to intercede and proceed with those talks and to find solutions that would be a win-win for everyone and that would create peace, prosperity, and most importantly, harmony.
Yeah.
Correct?
Nobody wants the outbreak of another world war. Nobody wants the outbreak of another global power competition, global power struggle. We've gone in detail about the trade and economic significance of the passage, but that's not all there is that's up for stakes.
We know that the Danish government and the Canadian government have contested some islands there in a very friendly way, right? Like the Danish government used to leave a bottle of whiskey for the Canadians.
I've seen that,
You've read that?
And then the Canadians would leave like a pack of beers or something.
Yes, right, in a very friendly and nice way, as both countries are known for. And but you've also had other interferences, right? You've had the Russians who have claimed sovereignty over some of those territories. Let us remember that the border between Canada and, or I would say between the U.S. and Russia is 3 kilometers.
Yes, from Alaska to that eastern point of Siberia.
Correct?
Yes.
So, yeah, but that would be from the Pacific. Now we're talking about the Atlantic. So you would have Denmark, Russia, and Canada are very, we could say, I love that analogy you've made with the Berlin Conference, right? It's we could
the
say
partition of the Arctic.
you have a lot of resources
Yeah.
in those areas, right? You have a lot of resources, so you have an economic aspect of it for the trade and trade route passages. You have a military dilemma about it, right?
Strategic significance, yeah.
The submarines placed there would be lethal.
Yeah.
Correct?
Would you dare misadventure into the Arctic if you knew that a submarine was there? But that's the beauty of the submarine. You don't know if it's there or not.
I see.
Very stealthy. Would you risk it?
So you have a submarine that is there. Yeah, you could place submarines there. It's and when you control the Arctic, you control the trade route. When you control the Arctic, you control
You control the future.
like
It's literally a battle for the future.
literally it's a battle for the future, because if you simply stop, think of it, if you stop the Panama Canal, like if you control the Panama Canal and that passage, that northern passage,
Yes.
you could disrupt
Everything.
the world economy.
No, it's the main artery. Look, that's what's connecting
the main
east to the
artery.
west. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the main artery. Yes. Therefore, it's a very geostrategic aspect of foreign policy that needs to be worked on
Yes.
responsibly, of course. And
But there's also the fact that Canada, especially in the Cold War, has served as a geographic buffer for the United States against the USSR back in the day.
Yes.
Right? Let's remember, the world is round. The Friday Salon, we believe the world is round.
I remember
That means that if the USSR wants to strike the United States, they don't have to go across the Atlantic. They simply have to go over the Arctic.
Yes.
And what's between the United States and the USSR in that regard? Canada. And so a lot of the Cold War defense policy was done like this between the Americans and the Canadians, held hand in hand. We've seen, for example, NORAD.
Yes, the Northern Alliance
Radio
air
early,
defense.
some air defense, exactly.
Yes.
Northern Organization of Radio Air Defense, or something like
Okay.
that, if I remember correctly.
So it's a joint
It's a joint
cooperation for the air
cooperation.
defense. Okay.
Exactly. And Canada's attempt at asserting their sovereignty was the development of a very sophisticated interceptor, the Arrow, which eventually got cancelled and in its place, or we can say it became obsolete, because by the time that the Arrow was unveiled to the public,
Do you know what it reminds me of? When Churchill made that radio defense system for alongside Great Britain.
okay,
When the Nazis were attacking the Blitzkrieg, they were bombing London, and
Okay.
Churchill made that whole defense system over the coast. Yes, so it's the same concept applied to Canada.
yes,
Yes,
as a geographical
yes.
buffer.
Okay, yes.
But by the time that the Arrow was revealed to the public, the USSR had just launched Sputnik,
Sputnik, yeah.
the first space-going
Yes.
vessel, and so interceptors became obsolete. The program got cancelled. And how did Canada respond to that? They purchased the Beaumark anti-air missiles from the United States.
Okay.
So that was the response. So there's always been that defense and strategic significance of American interest in Canada, which even, let's say, has its basis as far back as the War of 1812, or even earlier, we could say as early as the American Revolution.
I see.
As early as the American Revolution, when those 13 colonies rebelled against the crown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before going there, my question is: do you think Canada would like? I know you're the biggest fan of Canadian history I've ever met in my life. I met quite a few, and I know that you have maple syrup.
Running through my veins.
Exactly. So I would love to know and understand that. Do you think Canada could join the U.S.? Or do you think it's just like a psyop, a strategy for the negotiation?
You know what I think it is? We forget
Please,
sometimes when
please.
we talk about politics in terms of geostrategic significance or defense objectives, we forget that a lot of politics is just a bunch of people hanging out in a room together making decisions.
What did Churchill say about Roosevelt? My biggest task to save the free world is to seduce that man.
There you go.
And when Roosevelt, just for the anecdote, when Roosevelt came in and he saw Churchill naked in his bathtub, oh, Mr. President, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has nothing to hide to the U.S. President. Yes,
Exactly.
See, it's all about relationship. It's
Exactly.
two guys.
It's
It's,
about
two guys getting along.
It's about the interaction of personalities. Now, the personality, what personalities are at play here? We have Prime Minister Trudeau, who has just recently resigned his post as the leader of the Liberal Party, and the incoming President Donald Trump, who in the past have not enjoyed the nicest friendship with each other. There's that very famous anecdote, or it was even recorded, where you had all those world leaders gathered together. I believe it was Macron, Boris Johnson, and Trudeau, all gossiping about Trump behind his back.
Yes,
like literally like a high school cafeteria. Literally the gossip you see in a high school
Okay.
cafeteria. Trudeau talking, you should have seen this, you should have seen that. From that moment, those guys didn't get along. And so let's not forget that in politics, a lot of the times it's just personalities clashing with each other.
Right.
And so let's consider that regard. In this lens, or I think it's what Kenneth Waltz, a big realist scholar, it's what he called the first level of analysis, which is the interpersonal analysis of international relations. It could just be that Trump is trolling Trudeau. It could just be that Trump is,
Governor.
governor, like a little butt, like exactly. It's that type of thing. It's he's trolling him. We could say that. But let's say that the Americans are actually serious about this annexation attempt. First of all, in terms of topographical area, Canada is just much too large to become a singular state, first of all. Americans, like, Canada has the same regionalism as the United States have, you know? A guy from Alberta doesn't have much in common with a guy from Toronto, or a guy from Halifax, or a guy from Vancouver. Canada is very regional, and so it's going to take a lot of sophistication to make that into one state under the American Republic.
And honestly, like most Canadians, especially in big cities, have dual citizenship, right? And most
Exactly.
Canadians have a relative in the U.S. and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of Americans live in Canada. A lot of Canadians live in the United States. So there is no real animosity,
Exactly. There's no
right? Well, okay, the Canadians burned the White House, but
the
there
War
was-
of 1812.
It was on the British Empire.
That we put it on the British.
But then you have that question, that Quebec question.
I was
right?
just gonna get there, man.
Like-
you know? Like this is a force that has nearly torn apart the country countless times. This force has nearly torn apart the country since its inception, and it's in fact one of the primordial preconditions for the struggle of nationalism in Canada. Canadian nationalism is very vague and very abstract. It's a question of immense philosophical vigor to answer what is Canada and what is a Canadian.
Yes.
From that question of the two solitudes, the fact that Canada has not one, but two founding peoples, and three if you include the contributions of the indigenous peoples, like, we have these two competing national ideals in Canada, that of the English Canadians and the French Canadians, who went to war so many times, most famously the Battle of the Plains of Abraham,
Of course.
which we might describe as being the worst day in Canadian history, where English Canadians and French Canadians went to war with each other. Regardless of where you stand on it, that was a gruesome day. Both sides lost heroes.
Excuse me. Let us look at things the way they are, right? Before it was just the French
Yeah.
and the British.
Yes.
It wasn't Canadians.
It wasn't yet the concept of Canada.
Correct?
No.
Canada was born out of consensus.
Yes,
Say that, no?
totally.
We could say that Canada was born out of a consensus between the British royalists that wanted to stay loyal to the crown and to that bigger entity.
Mm-hmm.
We could say that French Canadians became more and more Americanized, and especially Quebecers love Americans, right?
Yes,
Like,
they're a lot more Republican.
yeah, because right, Americans have that love for the French, right? Since Lafayette,
Voilà.
nous voilà, Lafayette. They have like 80 cities called Lafayette.
Exactly.
And the founding fathers were Francophiles.
Totally.
So
Yes.
Americans, they all love New Orleans. They all love,
Louisiana.
oh my God, Paris, all of
Baton Rouge.
Le Croissant. And they love French culture,
Yes.
rightfully. Okay? And I would say there's less, how can I say, I don't want to get political, man, honestly, but like, let's be historical, right?
Yes.
Like, Quebecers, what would you say? Like, there's that question of French
Nationalism.
preservation of
Yeah.
language, of culture, of heritage. Do you think the U.S. can do that? The U.S. is centralized. The U.S. is more and more centralized with time, right?
Yeah,
But who created that centralization? Who created the FBI, for example?
the French.
The French, right? It was the nephew of Napoleon. The nephew of Napoleon, yes, the guy, created the FBI, and he centralized that power. By the way, we'll talk about all of that in our episode on the Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville.
Coming very soon.
Very soon, you will love it, and that's it. But we're living in interesting times. I won't
You
lie.
could say that. You could say that. Where lies peril, lies opportunity.
We're living in quite interesting times. Yes.
And we should be grateful for that. I always make the joke with people. Yes, I studied political. What's the joke? I say it's a great time to study political science, and I wish it wasn't.
Completely.
It's a great time to study
Completely.
political science, and I wish it wasn't.
When our business is thriving, the world is delving,
Is struggling.
struggling. Yes.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
I see. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. So I would say we'll try to produce more geostrategic. Tell us in the comments if you like that. Tell us if you like those quick analysis. Of course, we're trying not to get political. We're trying not to divide, not to have divergent opinions. Of course, we'd love to hear what you have to say about that, your analysis, your thought on the subject without, our goal is to get the political debate polite. Our goal is to get a certain form of solemnity, a certain form of mutual respect.
Decorum.
Well, yeah, decorum. Yeah, we just want to have a nice analysis. It's very important to analyze. To analyze in a cold way and rational.
A confrontation of the facts.
Exactly, and especially beyond good and evil and beyond ideologies. It's very important, right? And
Yes.
therefore, hopefully, everything will be correct, everything will be nice, harmonious, and magnificent. And,
We have faith that things are going to turn out good. It's no cause for genuine concern, to be honest.
Okay, I agree. And that was a beautiful episode, and today
I really liked all the things we touched on today.
Oh man, we'll do that more and more. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, again, let us know what topics you want to hear about.
Yes, please give us some topics. Give us some subjects. Any political philosophy stuff you'd like to hear
Global
about.
issues, current affairs.
That's
whatever.
all we talk about, honestly. Okay.
No, the whole basis for this podcast was, Carl, whenever I see you, we're going to talk about politics anyway. Why don't we put a camera in front of us?
Exactly, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Honestly, you look beautiful today, by the way, as usual. But and therefore, that is why we would like to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that your pleasure
Is our treasure.
exactly. And to that, I would say, voilà.
Voilà qui je suis. Mais voilà même ici, mes années c'est fini. C'est mes voeux, c'est mon cri. Mais voilà, tant pis.